The road was a blur of headlights and thundering engines, a never-ending ribbon of asphalt stretching into the darkness. Elvis Presley, the young man who would soon shake the world, was at the wheel of his 1954 Cadillac convertible, the wind whipping through his hair. It was a warm night in 1956, and the air was thick with the scent of exhaust and possibility, but the real fire was burning inside Elvis. He was a whirlwind of energy, a force of nature that couldn't be contained. "Where are we going, Elvis?" Bill Black, the bassist, shouted over the roar of the engine, "Anywhere but here." Elvis laughed, his eyes sparkling with a mix of mischief and ambition. He loved the road, the feeling of freedom, the endless possibilities. But he also knew that the road was a double-edged sword. It could make you or break you, and sometimes it felt like it was trying to do both. They were on their way to El Paso, Texas, for another show. It was just one of many stops on their grueling tour, but this night was different. This night, Elvis felt a strange sense of foreboding. Something was in the air, a tension that even the music couldn't fully dispel. As they drove, Elvis's mind wandered to the recent events that had left him both exhilarated and uneasy. A few weeks earlier, in a small town, Elvis had tossed his shoe into the crowd, a spontaneous act meant to get a reaction. But instead of cheers, he heard a sharp gasp. A moment later, an old lady in the front row clutched her head, blood trickling down her temple. Elvis's eyes widened in horror. "We need to get out of here fast," he had shouted, and the band had fled the scene, leaving chaos behind. The memory haunted him, but it was just one of many moments that defined their life on the road. They were a group of young men, barely out of their teens, chasing a dream that seemed almost impossible. But Elvis was different. He had a presence, a charisma that drew people in, a raw energy that made the crowd go wild. He could make a room come alive with a single glance, a smile, a flick of his wrist. But he was also a magnet for controversy, a figure who divided people like lightning splitting the sky. As they pulled into El Paso, the band's car was a mess. The odometer read 32,581 miles, a testament to the miles they had logged, the cities they had played, and the crowds they had electrified. But the car needed attention. They stopped at the Lone Star Motor Company, where Elvis paid $58 for a new rear window, wiper blades, a rearview mirror, and a radio aerial. The lube and oil change were crossed out, no time for that. They had a show to play, and every second counted. The hotel was a blur, the room a distant memory. They washed up quickly, put on their best clothes, and headed to the auditorium. The crowd was already waiting, a sea of expectant faces. Elvis took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The music started and the world around him faded away. It was just him, the guitar, and the crowd. The energy was electric, and for a moment everything felt right. But as they drove away from El Paso that night, the road stretching out before them like a promise, Elvis couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. The world was waking up to him, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for what was to come. The road had given him everything, but it was also taking something from him. And as the car sped into the night, Elvis knew that the journey was only just beginning. Gardner barely listened, as he cut the conversation short. Yeah, that's a good sideline. I want to tell you, it's been a thrill talking to you. You make a lot of sense. Give my best to the Colonel." "I sure will," came the reply. Steve Allen, Imogen Coca, and Hy Gardner found Elvis' performance with the top hat and the hound dog cute. But Sam Phillips, the man who discovered Elvis, was furious. He called Elvis in New York, practically yelling, "You better call home and get straight, boy. What are you doing in that monkey suit? Where's your guitar?" Elvis didn't like the monkey suit either. The day after the show, he went into a studio and recorded Hound Dog, "Don't Be Cruel," and "Any Way You Want Me." This was the first time he took charge of a recording session. Alfred Wertheimer, a young photographer, had been following Elvis around for a few days. RCA Elvis Record Company wasn't sure if Elvis would last, so they told Wertheimer to use black and white film. Wertheimer had seen Elvis shaving, walking around Times Square, and falling asleep on a couch in his hotel room. Elvis didn't mind being followed. He was so relaxed that sometimes Wertheimer felt more awkward than Elvis. When Wertheimer arrived at the studio, Elvis greeted him warmly. "How you feel?" Elvis asked. A little tired, Wertheimer admitted. He had been living on coffee, cigarettes, and vending machine snacks. "It should be a good session. He added, not really knowing why he said it. Elvis nodded. Well, I hope so. Steve Sholes, the engineer, suggested they start with Hound Dog. Recording in 1956 was tough. If anything went wrong, they had to start over from the beginning. They tried take after take. By the 14th take, the humor that had started the session was fading. Elvis wasn't happy. Wertheimer crouched in the corner, trying not to be noticed. At the 18th take, something clicked. Elvis grabbed the microphone, and the band fell into a groove. Elvis looked so happy, like he was doing exactly what he was meant to do. When they finished, everyone thought they had it, but Elvis wanted to try again. They kept going, and at the 31st take, they finally had it. The next day, Elvis took a long train ride back to Memphis. When they reached the outskirts, he got off early and walked home alone, carrying his radio and wearing the same suit he had on in New York. He asked a passerby for directions and smiled at her. His cousin Junior would take care of the bags. On July 4th, Elvis gave a concert at Ruswood Park in Memphis. Dressed in black with red socks and a red tie, he walked out to a roaring crowd. He opened with Heartbreak Hotel and played songs like Mystery Train, Blue Suede Shoes, and Hound Dog. The crowd went wild, especially when he slowed down Hound Dog and ground his hips to the beat. It was a magical night, and Elvis showed his hometown what the real Elvis was like. Elvis started dating June Juanico in July. They went deep sea fishing, horseback riding, and water skiing. June was young and energetic, and Elvis' mom, Gladys, loved her. They talked about marriage, but the Colonel didn't approve. Elvis would sometimes disappear for weeks, and June would have to wait by the phone. Despite the ups and downs, they shared some magical times. Meanwhile, songwriter Mike Stoller was on the Italian liner Andrea Doria when it sank. His partner, Jerry Leiber, was waiting at the dock in New York, excited about a hit they had with Elvis Presley. Stoller was more worried about surviving, but Leiber was thrilled. Hound Dog was a smash hit. Ed Sullivan, the host of a popular TV show, was worried about Elvis. Steve Allen's show had high ratings because of Elvis, and Sullivan knew he had to have Elvis on his show to stay relevant. Despite his initial reluctance, Sullivan decided to invite Elvis, knowing it would be a big deal. Elvis was becoming more himself, and no one could stop him. Ed Sullivan was a man of few words, and even fewer smiles. He was the kind of person who seemed to be always on edge, and it was clear he wasn't a big fan of the spotlight. Despite his stern and almost robotic demeanor, he became one of the most influential figures in early television. His show, The Ed Sullivan Show, was a weekly event that millions of Americans tuned in to watch. Yet for all his success, Sullivan was often the butt of jokes and parodies. People found it hard to understand why such a serious, unsmiling man could be so popular. One of the most memorable moments in Sullivan's career came when he had to decide whether to book a young, wild performer named Elvis Presley. Elvis was a sensation, but he was also controversial. His performances were full of energy, and his moves on stage were considered scandalous by many. Sullivan, known for his stiffness and lack of charm, was the last person you'd expect to embrace such a flamboyant entertainer. But the numbers spoke for themselves. Whenever Elvis appeared on the show, ratings soared. On September 9, 1956, Sullivan was recovering from a car accident, so Charles Laughton, an actor, filled in as host. Elvis performed from Hollywood, and the moment he stepped onto the stage, it was clear that something extraordinary was about to happen. He was dressed in a plaid jacket, an open-necked shirt, and black pants. As soon as he started singing "Don't Be Cruel," the audience was electrified. His voice was playful, and he had a way of making the camera work for him. He was self-aware, and every move he made was calculated to captivate the audience. Elvis's performance was a hit, and Sullivan, recognizing the power of the young singer, booked him for 2 more appearances. The second time, Elvis sang "Love Me Tender," a softer, more vulnerable song that showed a different side of him. The audience, which had been used to his wild and energetic performances, was moved by his sincerity. It was a moment that proved Elvis could be more than just a rock and roll rebel. He could touch people's hearts. But it wasn't just the music that made Elvis a phenomenon. His charisma and stage presence were undeniable. When he performed Hound Dog, he owned the stage, moving with a confidence that was both thrilling and a bit scandalous. The audience screamed, and Sullivan, who had tried to censor Elvis by filming him only from the waist up, couldn't hide the impact the young star had on his audience. Elvis's appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show were a turning point in his career. They introduced him to a national audience and solidified his status as a cultural icon. For Sullivan, the ratings were through the roof, and he had no choice but to book Elvis again. The bond between Elvis and his fans was unbreakable, and it was clear that he had become a force to be reckoned with. Off the stage, Elvis was a different person. He was a man who loved women, and women loved him back. He had a way of making every woman he was with feel special, whether it was a Hollywood starlet or a hometown girl. His charm, combined with his southern good manners, made him irresistible. He was a great kisser, and he loved holding hands in the dark. But despite his reputation, Elvis was a complex person. He was a product of his time, and while he might have had many relationships, he also had a deep sense of loyalty and a desire for genuine connection. Elvis's success came with a price. His mother, Gladys, struggled to adjust to the new life of fame and fortune. She missed the simplicity of their old life and often felt overwhelmed by the changes. Elvis, too, felt the pressure. He was always on the go, and the fast-paced life of a superstar left him little time to slow down. But despite the challenges, he knew that he had found his calling. He was a performer, and he was meant to be on stage. In 1958, Elvis received his draft notice, and his life took another unexpected turn. He was about to embark on a journey that would take him far from the bright lights of Hollywood and the adoration of his fans. But for now, he was still the king, and he had the world at his feet. Elvis' life was changing fast, and it was hard for his mom, Gladys, to keep up. She missed her old life in Memphis, where she had her friends and the simple routine of daily life. Bernard Lansky, a close friend, remembers her as a lady who liked to stay at home, wearing dusters and always offering visitors something to eat or drink. She rarely went out, and when she did, it was usually just to the grocery store. Her sister, Lillian, thought the big house at Graceland was too much for Gladys, and she was never truly happy there. But Gladys never told Elvis how she felt. Elvis' career was skyrocketing, and the Memphis Draft Board announced on January 8, 1957, that he would be classified 1A, meaning he could be drafted into the U.S. Army within 6 to 8 months. It was a shock to everyone. The idea of a rock star like Elvis joining the Army seemed surreal, but Elvis took it in stride. He believed that every able-bodied American should serve, and he was no exception. He decided to join the Army, even though it meant putting his career on hold. On March 24, 1958, Elvis was officially drafted. He went through the induction process, and the media made a big deal out of his haircut. Elvis had been gradually cutting his hair shorter over the weeks leading up to his induction, so the change wouldn't be too drastic. He joked with the reporters, saying, "Hair today, gone tomorrow," and playfully blew a handful of his cut hair at them. For Elvis, the Army was a chance to take a break from the chaos of fame. He said it would be a relief to have a routine and some downtime, but the reality of going into the Army hit hard when his mom, Gladys, passed away on August 14, 1958. She had been unwell all summer, but her death was a shock. Elvis and his dad were devastated. Elvis leaned over her grave, crying, and said, "Goodbye, darling, goodbye. I love you so much." Bernard Lansky stayed at Graceland for a week to help Elvis and Vernon. The house was empty without Gladys, and it was a tough time for everyone. Bernard remembers how much Elvis missed his mom. He said, "To my thinking, they were tight, mother and son. Man, there's nothing like being home. You go home now, the house is empty. There's nobody to talk to. Man, when you come home, you want to relax. You want somebody to talk to. Now who you going to talk to? Mama is gone. Nobody. You sit up there, you nervous, you walking the floor, going crazy. What can I do? Who can I talk to?" Elvis' grief made him question his life. He reached out to his old high school girlfriend, Dixie Locke, who was now married. They talked about the old days and how much things had changed. Elvis told her he wished he could walk away from the fame and the pressure, but he felt trapped. He said, "There are too many people that depend on me. I'm too obligated. I'm in too far to get out." Despite his doubts, Elvis continued with his Army duties. He was assigned to a Jeep driver for Captain Russell, but the job was short-lived. Captain Russell couldn't handle the attention Elvis was getting, with reporters and fans constantly trying to reach him. Lieutenant Bill Taylor, Elvis' new commanding officer, stepped in and moved him to the scout platoon in C Company. Elvis loved the job. He was out in the field doing real military work, and he thrived on the challenge. Elvis brought his family and some friends with him to Germany, including his dad, Vernon, and two close friends, Red West and Lamar Fike. They stayed in a house at 14 Gotha, where they tried to keep a low profile. Elvis bought a sleek black Mercedes, a white BMW 507 sports car, and a Volkswagen Bug. He had to wake up early for his army duties, but he often came home for lunch and was usually back by 6 p.m. Elvis' time in the army was a mix of routine and adventure. He loved the camaraderie and the sense of purpose. Lieutenant Taylor, who called him Presley, became a close friend. Elvis thrived in the scout platoon, and he even enjoyed the night missions and the thrill of being an aggressor. It was a time of growth and reflection for Elvis, a chance to find a new sense of normalcy in the midst of his chaotic fame, but the memory of his mom never left him. He knew that no matter where he went or what he did, a part of him would always be with her. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, had a special way of making people feel important. Even when he was a soldier, he stood out. His uniform, whether it was his fatigues or his dress blues, always looked perfect. He even had special tanker boots that he ordered from the PX, and they cost a lot, but he didn't mind. Joe Esposito, who met Elvis in Germany, was blown away by how cool he looked. Elvis was wearing camouflage pants, a white t-shirt, and his shiny boots, but he left them unlaced. Joe thought Elvis was the coolest guy he had ever seen. As time went on, Elvis's style changed. He was no longer just a guy from Memphis. He was Euro Elvis. He started wearing dark, narrow suits and looked more sophisticated, especially when he was out with showgirls. He wasn't one of those Americans who looked out of place in Europe. He fit right in. One of Elvis's first big trips in Germany was to Munich. He went with his friends Red and Lamar to visit an actress named Vera Tishachowa. Vera's mom didn't like Elvis and his friends and kicked them out of the house because they were bothering the animals, but Elvis didn't let that ruin his trip. He spent some late nights at the Moulin Rouge, a famous striptease club. The next morning, he met up with Vera for breakfast, and she noticed bits of tinsel in his hair and eyebrows. He told her he had stayed at the club all night. Elvis and Priscilla Beaulieu's story is one of those meant-to-be moments. Priscilla was only 14 when she met Elvis, who was 24. She had just moved to Wiesbaden with her family, and a few weeks later, a man named Cliff Cleaves asked if she wanted to meet Elvis. Of course, she said yes. Priscilla was nervous, especially about her sailor dress, but when she met Elvis, he was sitting in an armchair, wearing a red sweater and tan slacks and smoking a cigar. He jumped up when he saw her, and the room was filled with an electric energy. Elvis felt something special when he saw Priscilla. She reminded him of Deborah Paget, an actress he had a crush on during the making of Love Me Tender. Even though Deborah didn't give him the time of day, Priscilla looked a lot like her. Elvis was a romantic, and he fell for Priscilla instantly. He showed off by playing the piano, trying to impress her. Priscilla thought he was extremely handsome, but she wasn't immediately swept off her feet. Still, there was a connection, and she felt drawn to him. Priscilla's life was full of secrets. Her real father, Lieutenant James Wagner, had died when she was a baby, and her mother had never told her the truth. She found out by accident and was told to keep it a secret. This made her very protective of her privacy, and she knew how to keep things to herself. When she started seeing Elvis, she was very careful not to talk about him at school. She visited him several times a week, and they spent a lot of time in his bedroom. They talked about his mother, his fears, and his dreams. Priscilla felt like she could trust him, and he trusted her too. Elvis and Priscilla created their own little world. They were deeply connected, and Priscilla felt like she could be herself with him. She was protective of their relationship and kept it a secret from everyone. But the strain of staying up late and going to school during the day was taking a toll on her. She was tired all the time, and her grades were suffering. One night, Elvis noticed how exhausted she was, and gave her some pills to help her stay awake during the day. He told her they were safe, and to only take one when she needed it. Priscilla didn't know it at the time, but those pills were the beginning of a long and difficult journey for both of them. Elvis was also known for his kindness. One of his fellow soldiers, Private First Class Garcia, lost his entire family in a car accident. Elvis went to see him in the barracks and gave him $2,500 to help with the expenses. He never told anyone what he did, and the other soldiers respected him for it. Elvis didn't want to be treated differently because he was a celebrity. He just wanted to be part of the platoon. Elvis's time in the army was hard, but he found a way to make it bearable. He would sometimes sing for the other soldiers, and they loved it. They were far from home, and it was tough, but Elvis was there for them. He was one of them, and they all loved him for it. For Priscilla, life was becoming more and more focused on Elvis. She was living a double life, going to school during the day and spending her nights with him. She started collecting little things to remember him by, like cigar bands and notes he wrote her. She even had a piece of windshield glass from a car accident he was in. But the pressure of keeping it all a secret was taking a toll on her. She was so tired, and the pills Elvis gave her were the only thing that helped her get through the day. Neither of them knew the trouble those pills would cause, but their love for each other was strong, and they were determined to make it work. Elvis and Priscilla's time together in Germany was intense and complex. Priscilla, a young and beautiful 14-year-old, was drawn to Elvis like a moth to a flame. She saw him as a hero, a dream come true, and she was determined to be the perfect girlfriend. Elvis, on the other hand, was a famous rock star, but in the army he was just another soldier. He had to follow orders and do his duty, but he still found ways to be the star he was. Elvis took amphetamines, which he called Mother's Little Helper, to stay awake during long nights on guard duty. He believed these pills were harmless and even shared them with his friends, thinking they would help them too. Priscilla, however, never took them. She kept them in a little box with other mementos from Elvis, showing her strong sense of self-preservation. Elvis was competitive and wanted to be the best at everything. He practiced map reading, tried to outdo his fellow soldiers in physical training, and even helped his Lieutenant Bob Taylor tune up his car. Taylor remembered how Elvis would push himself to be better, even though he wasn't always the fastest or the strongest. One day, Taylor let Elvis win a race, but he never told him. Elvis was serious about his duty, but he also knew how to have fun, especially when it came to music. At a going-away party for a sergeant, Elvis sang Hound Dog and dedicated it to Taylor, who was deeply moved by the gesture. Despite his fame, Elvis had a soft spot for Priscilla. She was quiet and submissive, and he felt comfortable around her. Priscilla understood that Elvis didn't like to talk about his music or his fame, so she never brought it up. She was there to listen and support him, no matter what. When it was time for Elvis to leave Germany, Priscilla was heartbroken. She watched as he boarded the bus to the airport, wondering if she would ever see him again. Back in Memphis, Elvis was overjoyed to be home. He held a press conference at Graceland, where he talked about his time in the army and how much he missed his fans. He was anxious about his career, but his return single, Stuck on You, quickly rose to the top of the charts, showing that his fans still loved him. Elvis's return to the music scene was celebrated by many, including Frank Sinatra. Sinatra, who had once dismissed rock and roll, now saw the value in aligning himself with Elvis. He invited Elvis to his TV special, where they performed a duet, Witchcraft, and closed with Love Me Tender. The performance was a hit, and it solidified Elvis's place in the music industry once again. Priscilla, meanwhile, was trying to navigate her feelings about Elvis. She had fallen deeply in love with him, but she was unsure about their future. She had to be everything Elvis wanted her to be, and sometimes that meant making sacrifices. She cut his meat for him, wore the clothes he liked, and played the role of the perfect girlfriend. It was a lot of pressure, but she was determined to keep him. Jackie Kennedy, on the other hand, was a different kind of it girl. She was educated, sophisticated, and had a strong sense of who she was. She didn't bend to the will of men the way Priscilla did. When she met John F. Kennedy, she was selective and played it cool. She didn't rush into anything and maintained her independence. It was a different approach, but it worked for her. Elvis and Priscilla's relationship was a mix of love, pressure, and uncertainty. Priscilla was willing to do whatever it took to be with Elvis, while Jackie was more guarded and selective. Both women were trying to find their place in a world where men often held the power. Their stories show that there are different ways to navigate relationships, and sometimes the best path is the one that feels right for you. Jackie and Priscilla were both strong women, but they handled their relationships very differently. Jackie, with her upper-class charm and wit, played the game of love with a mix of care and indifference. She knew how to keep men intrigued, even if it meant leaving them confused. Her father, Black Jack Bouvier, a well-known Wall Street player, had taught her that all men were unreliable. Despite this, Jackie used her intellect and charm to keep men like JFK interested. She was well-read, always at the best dinner tables, and could say something risque that would shock even powerful men like Nikita Khrushchev. Jackie's ability to compartmentalize helped her deal with JFK infidelities and her own lavish spending habit. Priscilla, on the other hand, was deeply in love with Elvis. She faced a lot of challenges, especially when she discovered that Elvis had a girl, friend back in Memphis named Anita Wood. Despite feeling cheap and unloved, Priscilla's determination to be with Elvis never wavered. She studied Anita's love letters to understand what Elvis wanted, and adjusted herself to fit his desires. She knew he liked feminine and small girls, and she made sure to be exactly that. Priscilla's approach was to release her expectations and focus on the time she spent with Elvis, believing that if it was meant to be, it would be. This Zen-like attitude helped her stay strong during their long courtship. Jackie's approach to dating JFK was very different. She kept him off balance by rarely returning his calls, staying engaged to John Husted for longer than necessary, and disappearing on weekends without telling him where she was going. She gave JFK a lot of rope, making him work for her attention. This strategy worked, as JFK, who loved a challenge, found her all the more intriguing. In 1957, Elvis bought Graceland, an 18-room mansion in Memphis. It was a far cry from the 2-room shanty he grew up in. The house, named after Dr. Thomas More's wife's Aunt Grace, was a symbol of Elvis' success. He spent a lot of money on improvements, including a high wall to keep fans out. Elvis had a keen sense of style, and knew exactly how he wanted Graceland to look. He was inspired by the house of comedian Red Skelton, who mixed high and low elements in his decor. Elvis wanted Graceland to be bold, colorful, and fun, reflecting his status as a rock and roll star and Hollywood actor. Elvis' mother, Gladys, and a decorator from Goldsmith's department store helped with the initial decorating. Elvis wanted the downstairs painted purple, with twinkling lights on the ceiling and white corduroy curtains. However, Gladys opted for a deep blue with soft gray undertones and ivory brocade curtains. The overall effect was still bold and energetic, making it clear that a dynamic man lived there. George Golden, a flamboyant decorator, was brought in to complete the job. Elvis wanted a large bed for his mother and a soda fountain for his friends. He chose the most sumptuous materials and innovative designs, ensuring that Graceland would be a unique and impressive home. Despite his mother's hopes that he would stay in Memphis, Elvis was determined to keep moving forward. Graceland became a reflection of his vision, a place that evoked a strong response and left a lasting impression. Both Jackie and Priscilla, in their own ways, navigated the complex world of love and relationships. Jackie played the game with a mix of charm and detachment, while Priscilla remained steadfast and determined. Elvis, meanwhile, transformed Graceland into a home that was a true reflection of his personality and success. Elvis always knew how much Graceland meant to him. It was more than just a house. It was a symbol of everything he had accomplished. When his mother, Gladys, passed away, Graceland became even more special. It was a place where he could escape the chaos of the outside world and find a bit of peace. But even in Graceland, things weren't always easy. After Gladys died, Elvis was heartbroken. He received over 100,000 cards and letters, 500 telegrams, and 200 floral arrangements from fans who wanted to show their support. But nothing could fill the void left by his mother. The police even took him on a helicopter ride to help him take his mind off his grief, but it was no use. Graceland was his home, and he was determined to keep it. One day, Dr. Lester Hoffman and his wife, Sterling, came to Graceland to pay their respects. Elvis, wanting to know what they thought of his home, asked them to tour the house. Despite the rumors that Graceland was laughable, Sterling told Elvis that she would love to swap homes with him. It was a touching moment, and it showed how much Elvis cared about what others thought of his home. But Graceland wasn't just a house. It was a reflection of Elvis' success. He had come a long way from Hume's High School, and Graceland was the physical proof of that. Even when his father, Vernon, remarried and his new stepmother, Dee, tried to make changes to the house, Elvis quickly put a stop to it. Graceland was his, and no one was going to change that. Life at Graceland was unique. Elvis and his friends often stayed up all night, going to bed as the sun came up. They ate dinner at 9 p.m., and Elvis would go out with his friends around midnight. It was a wild and free lifestyle, but it was also lonely. Without his mother, there was no one to provide the maternal comfort he craved. Despite the chaos, Elvis was generous. He loved to give gifts to his friends and fans. Whether it was a car, a piece of jewelry, or a house, he found joy in making others happy. He understood what it was like to be poor, and wanted to share his wealth with those who needed it. His fans were his family, and he wanted to make sure they felt the excitement and glamour he experienced. Meanwhile, Priscilla, a young girl Elvis had met in Germany, was still in his life. They had been dating for a few years, and Elvis decided it was time for her to move to Graceland. It was a bold move, but Elvis was used to getting what he wanted. Priscilla moved in, and they kept their relationship a secret from the public. It was a risky move, but it worked. No one knew about the 17-year-old girl, living with the most famous man in the world. Priscilla's presence at Graceland showed how powerful Elvis' charm could be. He got what he wanted, and no one questioned it. It was a different time, and people trusted Elvis. Graceland was his sanctuary, and he made it into a place where he could be himself, surrounded by the people he loved. In the end, Graceland was more than just a house. It was a symbol of Elvis' journey from a poor boy in Mississippi to a global icon. It was a place where he could be free, where he could be generous, and where he could find a bit of peace. Graceland was Elvis' legacy, and it will always be remembered as the home of the king.